Before we begin this book review, if you haven't read it, if you haven't read Joan of Arc, you can come and listen in on Storyfire. I'll put the link in the description. You can come and listen in to what's going on in this review. Come and listen in or read the book. I recommend you read the book. I mean, listening to me is one thing, but reading it for yourself, it'll bring it to life. But anyway, thank you very much. And now let's crack on. Okay, guys, we're back with book 2, chapter 1. We're going to go through chapters 1 through 4 of Jeanne d'Arc, as you affectionately call it in the French name. And for us English people, Joan of Arc. You're with me, Vino Fire Sam, and I will allow the brothers Crin, Canadian Joseph, introduce himself. And I think finally I've got the recording of his visuals correct. So hopefully this will look a little bit better. Introduce yourself.
Yeah. I'm Joe from the Brothers Crin. I have a channel by that name over on YouTube and Storyfire. And if you're watching this on YouTube, it's on my History Corner, which is a subsidiary channel of the Brothers Crin, dedicated solely to history and history shows and books and whatnot. So, as these are a great love of both Sam and myself. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And well as Dan.
Now, also, guys, if you're watching this and you've just had the latest update from Apple and you find the fact that it prioritizes your camera every now and then and your microphone from your phone, infuriating, especially when you're about to do a recording, please leave a comment below and let Apple know just how livid you are with them, like I am. Because it is such a clunky, disappointing update. All right, book 2, In Court and Camp, chapter 1, Joan says au revoir.
Yep. Adieu to her friends Monguette and Holmet, I think it is.
Yeah. Little Mengette.
It's on January 5th of 1429. Mm-hmm. I do apologize for reverting back to French. Dan and I have been talking for about an hour entirely in French, so I'm trying to switch back to English.
En français.
So, but the thing is, we have her struggling. Oh, right. It's Holmet she can't bring herself to say goodbye to, because if she were to say, if she had to meet with her, she would not be able to separate herself from her.
Yeah.
And the scene is very much fiction, and she's crying. And this is something which it brings to mind how Twain felt towards his youngest daughter, I believe it was. He had very tender feelings towards her. So I find it a very difficult scene to kind of separate from Twain in a way. Not that everything is purely, him and his experiences. It's just Twain, his faith, his views of the world, they're all intertwined with this book. Like, it intertwines everything, as well as French history and even English and Scottish history. And Mark Twain was a very brilliant man when it came to reading history. He had I would argue he should have probably been a professor of history if he was alive today. Like, he'd be a brilliant professor because his insight is incredible. That said, there is one detail that I'm just going to touch upon on page 96, and that was the Prophétie de Merlin, the prophecy of Merlin, said to have come about 800 years before the time of Jeanne d'Arc, which would have been about the 7th century. That is to say, from the year 600 to 700, thereabouts. And the prophecy was originally in Latin. The prophecy is trois fontaines jailliront dans les ruisseaux, diviseront l'île en trois parties. Quiconque boira de l'eau de la première ne sera jamais malade et jouira d'une vie éternelle. Quiconque boira de l'eau de la seconde mourra d'une soif extinquible, avec un visage pâle et horrible. Quiconque boira de l'eau de la troisième mourra de mort subite, et la tombe rejettera son corps. Pour éviter une telle calamité, les hommes du pays s'efforceront de tarir les deux sources malfaisantes par 1000 moyens. Mais tous les moyens qu'on y entassera prendront une autre forme. La terre se changera en pierre. La pierre se changera en bois. Le bois se changera en cendre. La cendre se changera en eau. Alors, du bois chenu sortira une vierge qui arrêtera le fléau. This part is highlighted in the website I'm looking at. Alors, du bois chenu sortira une vierge qui arrêtera le fléau. That is to say, the great bane. And the virgin is supposed to be Jeanne d'Arc. Like, there's a great virgin who will come from a land full of oaks, Damouimi, to save the land. Après y avoir employé tous ces artifices, elle taillera de son souffle les deux fontaines malfaisantes. Puis, buvant à l'entrée de l'eau de la fontaine sur terre, elle portera dans une main la forêt de la Calédonie, dans l'autre, la tour de Londres. Quand elle marchera sous ses pas, jaillira une flamme accompagnée d'une fumée de soufre. Okay. So there's a reference to London's Great Tower.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reference to Caledonia, which is to say an older name for Scotland, l'Écosse. And so the idea of this prophecy was, like, I've only read a few of the sources from the time period. It became a source of obsession with the French because, just a quick history lesson about the Roman occupation of Judea. It's that before the time of Jesus, it became a source of obsession. So you had a lot of Messiah or wannabe Messiahs who started cropping up and saying, I'm going to liberate Jerusalem and whatnot. And the prophecies of Isaiah became an obsession for the Jewish people. Ensuite, the French had the same mindset when they were kind of, I don't know if occupation is the right word under the English, but around the time of Henry V, you have a lot of obsession growing around this prophecy of Merlin, which there's a lot of literary references. There's a lot of talk in later centuries about how obsessed people were. And Mark Twain is not doing anything new. I think it was Alexandre Dumas who also made references to it. But he came centuries later, from the 19th century. But the thing is, it's a commonly known fact that the prophecy of Merlin, no one knows if it was a true prophecy or not, if it was invented after, the 7th century, But the fact remains that the French believed in it. And sometimes belief in something is enough to give it power, in a way. And because belief is power in a lot of ways. And so, with this growing obsession that only la pucelle, could save them, that is to say, the messenger, this is a female term for messenger, only she could save them. A virgin female messenger will save France and cast down the English, which, make of it what you will, but I mean, no offense, but it did kind of happen.
Yeah, whether that's a self-fulfilling prophecy or because you never know, like with these things, that there's the potential that the prophecy makes the thing happen because the words have been said, the information is then in the minds of people, and therefore it happens, or it was a true prophecy. Impossible to say. But it's referenced in the book in chapter 2, in the second paragraph. It says, next, a prophecy of Merlin, more than 800 years old, was called to mind, which said that in a far future time France would be lost by a woman and restored by a woman. And France was now, for the first time, lost. And by a woman, Isabel of Bavaria, her base queen.
Although there's another interpretation one could take from it.
Mm-hmm.
Isabelle Capet, that is to say, the mother of Edward III.
Yes.
You could also look at it as her having lost France,
yes,
in a way.
Yes.
Because she wanted to transmit her claim to Edward. You could also read it that way.
Absolutely. There was two routes by which France was lost to a woman, and it makes sense either way. So the prophecy is an interesting one, and also we've got to think about this in the mind of the sort of like the Middle Ages, it's the Middle Ages. Yeah, a middle-aged mind that's in a deeply Catholic land. You know, deeply affected by religiosity. It's not like the mind of someone today where everyone's a skeptic, everyone has access to the internet, and 50% of everybody is atheist. It's not that same. There's not that same reverence. A lot of what's transmitted is transmitted in story and tale through that period, because most people couldn't read. You know, you had to be well educated, you had to be of noble birth or something along those lines to have that skill and talent. So most of what the information they had was transmitted by story, by old wives' tales, you know, that kind of thing. So these things carry more weight, which is touched on early on in the book, because we go back to that point where they have the belief in the tree, and that was passed on to them by their parents, and the belief in the fairies,
and so on.
Yeah, and they were good Christians because they had that judgmental attitude that was again given to them by their parents. So that's that route by which their mind works. I think it's very important just to understand like the fact that prophecy has a deep impact on them.
And there's something that I heard a Indian say to me a while back. It's that culture is something that is passed down from parent to child and passed down through generations. What your culture in reality is really something that your parents passed to you, and it's something inherited. And nowhere is that more true than the medieval period.
Yeah.
And I do think that this is a very interesting, because my friend told me, like, this is an Indian saying to an extent, and I thought, oh, well, that's neat. And the Indian people tend to be very, very wise about this sort of thing, because culture over there is passed down from parent to child, and it's very, very important to the Indian people. And you know what? You look at even today, people are very attached to their culture, whatever it may be. But it's kind of like, well, you know, you look at, say, Star Wars Episode 4 in 1977. Well, you know, my dad went to watch it. And, you know, then, you know, we watched it together later. Well, that's something that's been passed down. But you have other people who it's like, well, I went into the theaters to watch it in 77. And I've watched it later with my kids. So I've passed it down to my kids. So that cultural moment in 77, sitting in the theaters there and first seeing George Lucas's great masterpiece, is a moment in time that isn't just there for the one generation, or the two generations, because, you know, you might have had parent and child back then, but it's been passed down. And that cultural epoch, that cultural moment is being passed down. So who's to say in 150 years that cultural moment won't still be there? So, and the medieval people kind of looked at the world that way. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there was still talk of how St. Louis had lived, for example, or how Philip Auguste had pushed back the English, or for the English, how just Henry II was with them. And he was very good with the English people. He liked them more than the people in other lands. But they also spoke of the harshness of the conquest. And they still do today to an extent, which was a terrible moment in history, 1066.
Yeah.
Although I'd argue, I think it was 1083 was a little harsher. I think or was it 1069, I think, when he went in and wiped out the entirety of the north of England, his population almost. That, like, you look, like in the history departments I went into, that moment, like those months of the harrowing of the North, were talked in hushed voices So, these cultural moments, we might say it's only the medieval mind, but maybe, I don't know. I don't mean to contradict you, Sam. It's just, I'm just wondering if maybe this still remains with us a little today.
Oh, no, no, no. By the way, I agree. It's still with us, but I wanted to just bring to life perhaps the depth to which
Yeah.
it would have been, because we're talking about a group of people that were unlearned, illiterate, yeah, and so it has a different effect on the mindset. Literacy changes your mind massively, as has been proven. Moving to chapter 3, the paladin groans and boasts, and I love this chapter because the paladin, as a character, I wrote down he really is a ponce. And there's this one particular line where he says, I literally just muted everything on my screen and Apple is still sending me notifications and I just muted everything. I'm going to murder Apple. Steve Jobs, you're lucky you're not around because I'm going in to wreak havoc. So I love the way he's easily played, and it's this, if I know myself, and I think I do, my performances in this campaign will give you occasion more than once to remember those words. And those words were, wherever danger confronts you, you will make yourself conspicuous. And he's going, yes, that's me. When danger comes, I will be first on hand. In his head, that's who he is. And oh, it's just fantastic. We all know that person in our life who, in their head, they really are the greatest of the great. And
oh yeah.
And then you let them have their game, and then eventually you can't help but start prodding and poking at them and jabbing at their ego, and like as if to say, could you just lower yourself a little bit? And thank goodness for the likes of Noel, who does that throughout the book, just jabs and teases, and
he also puffs it up sometimes just for sport.
Yeah, he does. There's one bit in it. It might be in our next version, but it might be in our next thing. I can't remember because I've got ahead of myself. But he really does inflate the paladin just to rip it out of him. I love it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Honestly, this are two of my favorite characters in this book. I'm going to be honest. I think it is a crime that we have not gotten any other author who has touched these two personalities and brought them into like a Lord of the Rings type book, just to have this kind of comedic duo, because the paladin is just such a perfect character to poke fun at. Noel is just such a hilarious character. I like how it's commented that when he got conscripted, he begged like a dog to be let off, cried and said he wanted to go to his mother.
Yeah.
Him, a Lionheart, that tumblebug. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, that's
that baby. He goes
talking about, right?
He goes. But
the funny thing is that it's found out that, I think it's later in that chapter, that the paladin had also begged.
Yeah.
And it's just, oh, here it is. I found it. The last page, or one of the last pages of the chapter. Yes, I know he was. He begged like a slave and bawled for his mother. He said his health was delicate, and he didn't know how to ride a horse, and knew he could not live the first march. But then Noel adds, but really he wasn't looking as delicate as he was feeling. There was a cask of wine there, a proper lift for 4 men. The governor's temper got afire, and he delivered an oath at him that knocked up the dust where it struck the ground, and told him to shoulder that cask, or he would carve him to cutlets and send him in a basket. The paladin did it, and that secured his promotion to a privacy in the escort without any further debate.
Fantastic.
But that said, the situation, for those who may not have been listening to your excellent audio reading or been reading along, is that Jeanne had gone to Vaucouleurs to get the support of the local governor to provide her an escort to get to Chinon, where the Dauphin is. And the thing is, he at first refused continuously, and she was only assisted by her uncle Laxall and Louis, who had kind of slipped himself into the governor's midst as a secretary. And she eventually won him over. And the thing is, he decided to kind of balk a little on the escort and gimp out, providing her with essentially fresh recruits, raw recruits. And two of the men who just so happened to be there to get drafted were, well, Paladin and Noel. But the way Jeanne talks about that moment is that it was a moment that was meant to be.
Yeah.
And that they were supposed to be selected.
Yeah.
And that it was not the gouverneur who selected them, but rather God.
Yeah.
In turn, though, to an extent, it reminds me of, I think it's Peter and his brother. I forget his brother's name in the Bible. I think or was it Simon and his brother?
I was going to say, well, Simon is Peter, and there's James and John, the two brothers. So the sons of thunder are James and John, and then there's Peter, Simon Peter, also known as Cephas.
Okay. I was pretty sure that Peter's original name was Simon. But
yeah.
The thing is, I really need to get around to reading the Bible again. It's been almost 20 years. But my memory isn't what it once was.
No.
The thing is, this moment, it reminds me a little of when she goes to visit with the paladin and forgives him. I think that's later. It's reminiscent a little of the "Come, I will make you fishermen amongst men" scene. I think it is. And she makes it very clear that she knew they were there in her accompaniment, like in her coterie. She also makes it very clear that these two were two that she knew would be there, and she wants them with her because she considers them old friends of hers. But it is such a funny moment because Twain kind of pokes fun at that kind of semi-biblical moment. And he just turns Paladin into such a buffoon.
Yes, absolutely.
But
I agree. I actually found myself thinking, like you said, more like on the Merry Pippin side, where
yes,
they're the sideshow. They're the sideshow.
Well, Mary,
but the perfect sideshow.
Yeah, Mary in the book is like Noel.
Yes,
but he's this experienced, well-traveled, smart, clever. He's seen it all. He kind of reminds me in some ways of st-Jeanne. He gets one or two slower moments, like the fairy tale story figure of st-Jeanne from Quebec, but in the Maritime. But Pippin definitely does get some Paladin moments, except not quite as pompous.
No, it's a toned down version of these two. These two are playing extreme characters.
The only time Pippin ever ends up almost as dumb is when he just tosses a rock down the pit.
But I think the reason you get the extremities of characters in this that you don't from Merry and Pippin is because ultimately Frodo gets corrupted by the ring, whereas Joan is never corrupted. And so because Joan is not corrupted, you have to present aspects of personality outside of her. So you have to explore the extremities of personality outside of her, which these two characters provide the vehicle for. Whereas Frodo in Lord of the Rings is the vehicle for showing some of those qualities because ultimately he's corrupted. So you don't have to go so extreme with Merry and Pippin within that. Because in reality, almost the only character in Lord of the Rings that doesn't get corrupted is Samwise. Like, he's the only character that isn't truly corrupted. He even holds the ring. He even maintains the ring. But yeah...
And
you go on.
And he outsmarts the ring.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I see what you're doing there. You're trying to trick me into thinking I'll be the greatest. No, because the ring's like, oh, I'll make you a great warrior. And Sam, that's not what I want.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then you're going to build this great big garden? You
Yeah.
almost have the ring like with a question mark there going, I don't know how to get to this guy.
But-
And you've got Sam.
But you can't say that of
I see.
Gandalf. You can't say it of Gandalf. Gandalf knows he can't touch the ring. He can't touch it because it will corrupt him. He knows. He knows that ring is too powerful for his hands.
It's
Sorry,
too easy
looking
to
at
do.
chapter 4. So Joan leads us through the enemy. This is
Yep.
that classic building a concept within a story. But right in the early stages, there's a bit of it that I really love. And that is Joan. They're considering Joan to be a witch. And it took me to that point in the Bible where the Pharisees go, Jesus is expelling demons, therefore he must be from Satan. And he's like, well, why would Satan be expelling his own demons? It doesn't make sense. He goes, that's just he essentially says to the Pharisees, that's essentially stupid. A house divided can't succeed. Okay? And then they go, well, give us a sign that you're from God. And he goes, no, I'm not giving you a sign. I will not provide you a sign. You can have the sign of Jonah. And that's a whole different deviation, and I won't go into it. But
they know he expelled a demon. Isn't that sign enough?
yeah, exactly. So he goes, no sign is given. But you look at this, and within this, so the way she deals with it, it says they were evidently amazed, and then basically they start seeking out a sign, because they say it is a pity that you should not, because she says no, she provides a sign, and it is a pity that you should plot another's death when your own is so close at hand. And then they die, and everyone goes, ooh. And the sign of Jonah that Jesus spoke about was a sign of death. So there's a parallel in there. It's not the same, but there's a parallel in there. And I just thought that was very interesting.
And there's another parallel to when in the Bible Jesus kind of predicts the death of someone. It's just a single word here, sorrowfully.
Yeah.
Jeanne is already sorrowing and grieving for her, for this other person.
I know where you're going to go with this.
So,
I know where you're going to go with this. Go on.
No, that was it.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say he was sorrowful over his friend. I can't remember his name of his friend now. Lazarus. And he was sorrowful over that death, even though he was going to resurrect him. But he cries over it.
Yeah.
Interesting. But so they go on this long walk down. Oh, go on.
And there's another thing. She accrues another one of her titles, La Vierge de Vaucouleurs, the Virgin of Vaucouleurs.
Go on. Sorry, I missed that a little bit. Sorry.
She's gotten one of the first of her titles.
Yeah.
La
The
Vierge
Virgin of
de
Vaucouleurs. Yeah.
Virgin of Vaucouleurs. Later she'll swap that out for Pucelle d'Orléans. But this is the first military title she's gotten.
Yes. The thrust now of this chapter, though, is in reality a look into whether she's a liar. Because it's a test of her quality. Is she a liar or is she a truth teller? And how does she feel about obfuscating the truth? Because she has this conversation with this captain where she essentially misdirects him. But never lies. But she knows that she's misdirected and she gets questioned about it. Like, they go, well, you weren't lying, but you were misdirecting. And she says, I told no lie, yet I deceived. And she says, I tried all other ways first, but my mission required it. I did wrong, I think, and I am to blame. But then she goes on to say, but I'd do it again. I'd do it again. So she's justifying it, but interestingly, so then you go, so was she a liar? Was she dishonest? But I think it's really important that that's followed up by Sir Louis saying, well, our war ethics would have permitted us to purchase our own lives, whereas she was not prepared to tell lies in the purchase of her own life. She was only prepared to truthfully deceive someone. setting her above everybody else. And it's setting the tone for who she is and what kind of person she is. I think it's a great little... I think it's an important chapter to understanding the mind of this young girl who actually was very clever.
Yeah, and it also lays down tragically the first stone, so to speak, in how the trials are going to go.
Yeah,
for her. She's never going to lie in her trials, and other men may lie and deceive and whatnot, but she can't bring herself to. And to an extent, this is kind of what dooms her. I think doom is a good word, not damn, because doom, because, condemn sounds like she's condemned to a certain place, but doom just suggests her mortal life would be over. And she never once tells a lie, but she evidently sorrows for it. And now my memory isn't what it once was when it comes to the Bible, but I'm pretty sure there are moments like this in the Bible with Jesus where there are tricks played and he's not comfortable, and then he leads it into his parables.
Yes.
And that's what it reminds me of to an extent, but it also is... what was that story?
Well, they often ask him questions. The Pharisees, the scribes, the priests, they often ask him questions, and he replies to them frequently, well, answer my question first, and if you answer my question, I'll answer yours. He's not prepared to answer a question that's going to readily entrap him throughout the Gospels.
And here...
No, go on.
Here with the... when it comes to the military situation, this is a separate issue it reminds me of, is when it comes to her... let me just find the part again, regarding lies and truth. And now they see it as we'd be fully willing to, tell a lie. It's reminiscent of render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and render unto God's what is God's. Where with war, she's kind of rendering unto Caesar, that is to say, what is Caesar's. She is prepared to do military action because it's a necessary tool to achieve what her mission is, which is essentially rendering unto Caesar. And she is prepared to render unto, God what is God's, which is to say she's confessing here because, she tells them, I really don't feel comfortable with this. And yes, I had to do this to save us, and I would do it again, but that doesn't mean this was the best course of action to an extent.
Yes. It's not the perfect course,
but
it is the only course.
And I would do it again, but she regrets it. It feels like a confession.
Just a small point as well on this. Just a small point is when she says that, she is actually being honest in her confession. So because we think about Jesus and he talks about openly confessing one's sins, and that in itself. So we talked about this before in Luke 7 where the prostitute washes Jesus' feet and he says your sins are forgiven. Essentially because she's been honest, she's been transparent, and that in itself is cleansing, honesty and truth. And here we see her then turning the matter over in her mind. Then she added with quiet decision, but the thing itself was right and I would do it again. She's being honest. Yep. I would do it again. I think that's really important. And also, you just mentioned the Caesar's things to Caesar and God's things to God. Interesting that ties back round because I think it was a scribe that was questioning him at the time, saying, should we pay taxes? And it was a trick question. Yes. It's a trick question because they hated the Romans, and so if he goes, yeah, we should be paying taxes, then there'd be a whole group of people that hated him. And if he said no, well, then the Romans would get to do him for sedition. So either way, it was a trick. So he goes, pass me this coin, and whose face is on it? And they go, Caesar's. And he goes, right, we'll go and give Caesar's things to Caesar and God's things to God. So it's a trick question, of which then he takes a really clever little sidestep to get out of it. He doesn't directly answer the question. He doesn't say, yes, you should pay your taxes. He says, give Caesar what's owed to Caesar.
There's something my Mal once said. She said, they gave a trick question and they got a trick answer.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I just wanted to add something to anyone listening to this who might be listening in or reading it. They talk in leagues. And leagues for Europeans and Canadians, a league is 5.5 kilometres. And that would be about 4 miles, 3.5 miles, something like that, give or take. So that's one league. And so when it says they covered 13 leagues, that is 72 kilometres, which would be about 50 miles, give or take. Because it's 1,608 metres is a mile, so 1.6 kilometres. So give or take, I've got 72 kilometres written down. So if you're not sure, it's 50 miles, maybe a bit more, I would say, or 72 kilometres.
Okay. I have no idea about anything regarding miles, so I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
I don't know how that system works, but kilometers, that's how Canada counts. And we have plenty of old books which do count in leagues as well, like Europe does. So you're quite right in pointing that detail out.
Well, I just wanted to consider it because it talks about through that chapter they're going through bogs and cold. It's January, February. Is it February by this point that they're going through this? Either way,
refer back
because we started out in January 5th, but then they kicked around for some time. Something we haven't covered. They waited for 10 days to get going because she prophesies something, but obviously it's the voices in her head are telling her something. So we're further into January, maybe into February at this point.
Yep.
I think that's a good place because we said we'd get to chapter 4. That's the very end of chapter 4. And next time we'll cover the next, let's say, 4 or 5 chapters, something like that.
Yeah, because the next couple of chapters, are very important.
Yeah.
And we get to see... Oh, and there's another thing that Jeanne does to prove herself to her men and makes them believe she's the pucelle. And that's that she drills her men.
Yes, that's a great bit. It's a great bit.
She ends up, because a lot of them doubted her military capabilities, she proves her military knowledge.
That's the next chapter, isn't it? That's the next chapter?
That's in chapter 4.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes, it is. Yeah, sorry.
No problem. That's something I just noticed in my notes. And that is a moment that, it's quite remarkable. Such as a carpenter knowing a lot about basic economics and church clerical infrastructure and administration back in the Roman period.
Yeah. It's, yes. And she's learning by visual as opposed to practice, which is quite fascinating. And so she's got fantastic skills. And it talks about how she'd been learning. Sir Louis de Conte points out how much he's perceiving by talking to people and listening and learning. Although that might be the next chapter as well. Okay.
Which all I'm pointing out is that it's almost miraculous how skilled she is for a little girl. And I say little because she's not supposed to be in the book very tall. Yeah. She's, I guess I shouldn't say little, but I guess I should say something like petite or petite, I think it is in English. But yeah, it's quite remarkable just the journey they're on and the fact that she uses trickery and cunning to slip past the English, which the thing is, I was reading another book, another historic fiction book, and it's kind of funny just how the English are not easily tricked in Pillars of the Earth, but how easily they're tricked just in this moment.
Yeah.
In this the market contrast.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not wrong there to point that out. Okay, guys.
But
because otherwise we're bordering on near an hour here when we promised half hours.
Oh, okay.
Stints. So I think we'll probably pick this up in a couple of weeks' time. Please listen to the audiobook. If you're not reading and you just want to, you can click the link and grab it in Storyfire. It's absolutely free. You can just listen like a podcast. Easy peasy. And then also, now make sure you're following the Brothers Crin across all his socials. He does fantastic work with literary stuff on his YouTube channel, so you can follow along if you love books like Lord of the Rings. If you like video reviews on perhaps the latest TV programs for things like what's the show you were reviewing? The new Game of Thrones. And get a literary perspective on these programs and these books, I would advise you to follow the Brothers Crin across his socials. Thank you very much, Joseph.
My pleasure.
And I hope you have a lovely day. See you next time.
Definitely.